Mr. Ritzick,
Here.
Mr. Schaefer,
Here.
Mr. Urban, Mr. McGinley.
Present.
We have 6 of 7 present at the moment.
Thank you. Can we get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Motion and second. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any in opposition? None heard. Motion carries. Mr. Ritzick,
So I'm going to move to approve the minutes of the
Oh, yeah.
September 16th, 2024 meeting.
I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. I
Sorry.
should allow anybody public comment on agenda items. Mr. Ritzick,
So I'm going to move to approve the minutes of the September 16th, 2024 meeting.
you need a second?
I'll second.
All in favor indicate by saying aye. Any in opposition, any abstentions? None heard. Motion carries. Mr. Ritzick,
I'm going to make a motion to amend the minutes of the September 19th, 2024 meeting. Attorney Khan had reached out to me and recommended some changes in the language. So I am going to
well,
read.
first of all, we should have a motion to approve them and,
And
and
then
a
amend,
second,
yeah.
and then do the amendments that are necessary, okay?
So yeah, I'll move to approve the minutes of the September 19th, 2024 meeting.
Okay, we need a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Now you want to make your amendment, please?
Yes, so I will move to make an amendment to the September 19th, 2024 meeting minutes. So if you go to number 6 on the minutes, where it says right to know RTK officer motion, there is a small description at the bottom. That description will stay. There will be a line added. So it will say, Sarah Steers, comma, Esquire of Curtis and Hefner LLC is designated as the RTK officer for the Luzerne County Government Study Commission, comma. Mr. Khan is designated as an alternate, comma, and the solicitor is authorized to take all appropriate steps to ensure compliance with RTK and sunshine laws, period.
So you made that motion for the amendment. Do you have a second?
Second.
And a second for the amendment. All in favor of the amendment indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any in opposition? Any abstentions? None heard. Motion carries. Now, we had a motion on the floor and a second to approve the minutes and now approve them with the amendment that was added, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So we had a motion and a second, and now to approve the minutes with the amendment that was just just stated by Mr. Ritzick. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Any in opposition, any abstentions? None heard, motion carried. Ms. Malcolms,
I do not have any bills to date, but I do have my budget
Okay.
that is attached at the end. I don't know if anyone has any questions about it. What I did was since we haven't spent any of that $75,000 this year yet, but we're still early in the year, I just deducted that from the total amount and came up with a total of $185,000.
so that's a request for the calendar year 25, correct?
Mhm.
Any questions for Ms. Malcolms? We have a motion?
So I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the budget or
Okay.
present that to county council.
Yep. Do we have a second? No, it actually, right now, it'll go to the manager until he
Okay,
presents it, okay?
okay,
But we should call it a copy of the county council so they know.
okay.
Okay,
I'll second that.
we had a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Mitchell? On the question? All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Any abstentions? None heard, motion carries. Mr. Khan, do you have anything this evening?
Mr. Chair, as a follow-up to the meeting last week, we did complete our analysis on the materials that were submitted to this commission concerning the powers of the district attorney and the controller. And we await direction from the commission about whether the commission wants to meet in private to discuss that or have any presentations to the public. But our research there is done and we're ready to move to the next topic.
Okay, what reason would be that we would meet in private in executive session?
It's all about what the commission needs. We prepared legal advice, which the commission is entitled to receive confidentially. It's the commission's privilege to waive or not waive. Like any privilege, it can be waived completely. It can waive in part. The memorandum we submitted is 9 pages with some, lengthy analysis going through different scenarios. So again, it's up to the commission to decide if it wants all that released to the public, if it wants part of it, if it wants to ask questions with the protection of the attorney-client privilege before going to the public, and we will serve the commission as requested.
Okay.
Mr. Khan, the 9-page report that you've done, have you submitted that to anybody on the commission yet? Is there any way we can get a copy of that before we even decide to move into an executive session at a different point in time? Just so we can digest that before we were to meet.
Yeah, I sent it to the chair.
Okay.
So I have paper copies and whatever the commission.
Well,
Would the chair forward that to the commission, or?
I forwarded the email. That wasn't attached.
No, there was no email
Okay.
forwarded with that.
Would you please forward it again?
I'm happy to do that. I have paper copies for the commission. If that's helpful.
Would you please forward it again? So everybody has it, please. The
Is-
second part would be.
So you want to send it to the commission general email?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Happy to do that.
everybody's should have that copy.
Sure.
Maybe we should have an executive session for our next meeting at like 5:30.
I think that would be great.
Everybody
I could do
okay with that
5:30.
time frame?
And to be clear, Mr. Chair, it could be an executive session depending on the needs of the commission. It could also just be receiving information without any
Well-
questions. So it's up to the commission.
I think what we should do is probably have an executive session, sort of hash it out,
Sure.
and then we'll know going forward. Okay?
Would we also discuss what we would like to release to the public at that point in time? I know, Mr. Khan, you've mentioned in the past about not releasing the entire 9-page memo because that is a lot to digest. And quite frankly, at this point in time, I don't know if the commission's ready to release such a large report, but just giving a 30,000-foot view and then maybe like a public oral presentation, not necessarily a deck or anything like that.
We can do whatever the commission wishes. We can do any of the above. It's the commission's prerogative. And if we're meeting before the next meeting in advance, then I'll receive the direction then, and
Okay.
I'll be prepared to do whatever the commission
And
wishes.
then, Mr. Khan, another question, and Mr. Chair, this could be for you as well. Any correspondence from Mr. Khan that includes things like the DA's report? Can Mr. Khan forward that to the entire commission so that we receive it?
Everybody on the commission should have a copy.
Sure.
So practice moving forward, if you would forward any of those things to the entire commission,
Happy to.
because I know I'm sure probably last week with Miss Lawrence's review of the charter and her working as clerk or close, you probably sent something that I would like to see that we could do, and if there's just a lack of communication there, we want to fix that up, and I appreciate that, Mr. Khan.
Of course.
Thank you.
Okay. No consultant report because they had a previous engagement. So we're at interviews, and I've asked Mr. Kersey to come forward. You can use the podium over there and turn the mic on, please. So anybody can hear you who may be zooming in. Mr. Kersey was a member of the Charter Study Committee and also the Transition Committee, I believe.
Correct. Yep.
So he has a lot of knowledge and background in regards to what the Charter Committee did in 2010.
Well, thank you so much, for the invitation, and thanks in advance also for all the time and effort you're going to be putting in over the next few months. I think as I was thinking about what I wanted to say tonight, there's maybe 2 big questions that I hope you're thinking about over the next few months. The first one is probably the simpler of the 2 questions. Are we better off today than we were under the 3-commissioner system? And from what I've read in your public comments, I think we're on the same page, that I think we're clearly in a better situation as a county today than we were before home rule. Whether you're looking at the budget debt, credit rating, level of corruption, efficiency in government, I think we've made great progress as a county on all of those issues. I think the second question, which will be where I imagine the vast majority of your time is spent, is whether or not the charter as written is infallible. Is it perfect? And I think given the hindsight of time, there's certainly some interesting areas to think about and review. And I'm certainly going to be willing to take any questions, but I know issues of size of council, whether or not we should elect districts or at large, the unified law office, just as a few examples, are very important questions for you guys to be thinking about. And the one thing I would ask anytime you debate a change is you think about the issue of trade-offs. It's very easy to look at a change and see what is the positive that's going to come about, but also think about what might be some of the negative consequences of any change. And just one example, I know there's a lot of discussion about the unified law office and whether or not, the election board, the county council should have their own independent legal advice. And I understand the rationale for it. You want to have your own lawyer, you want to have your own advice. But if you look back at what we had before a unified law office, you had a lot of, within county litigation, and now we have at least a law office where the loyalty is ultimately to do what's best for the county. So again, I think there's going to be some interesting issues to discuss, and I've got a few, but I'd love to take any questions you have about things you're thinking of changing, or maybe our rationale in terms of why we made certain decisions in the charter.
Mr. Kersey, thank you for being here. Thank you for the charter that you wrote. Just right off the bat, I have to ask, you've had the charter now for over a decade that you produced, that you were part of hand in. Looking at the charter today, what would you tell yourself, 14 years ago? What would you have changed? One or two top line items that you would have changed and said, listen, and I think perspective is important. Like you said, why you did what you did so long ago. Mr. Morelli was here last week and laid that out really nicely for us. So we don't need to rehash all of the events of the past, but please feel free to do that as well.
Yeah, I think there's 3 or 4 issues that I would look back on. I think one is looking at the restrictions we place in terms of who can be on authority boards and commissions. And I think it's important to understand the situation at the time where there was not only a lot of corruption, but a lot of blurring of lines in terms of, the role that people played in the government at the time. And we made it a very strict, in terms of who could be on authorities, boards, and commissions. I think it's a legitimate question to say, have we gone, or did we go too far for legitimate reasons in terms of keeping people who have, maybe not tons of contact with the county, maybe someone who has a contract or someone who works for an architectural firm that does something in the county that legitimately wants to work on a commission for no reason other than, the good of the county, can't do it in this situation. So that's one thing that I think at the time made a lot of sense, but if I were in your shoes, I would certainly spend some time thinking about that. I think size of council was an issue that we spent, as much time as almost anything in debating. And I think there's positives and negatives. I thought 11 was a little large, to be honest with you. The argument, which ended up, kind of holding sway, is you have more people allowed to be a part of county government. I think that's a positive. Because we did not elect at large, by having 11 different members, you're more likely to get geographic balance throughout the county. And I do think history has shown that's, worked out. There was a lot of concern that Wilkes-Barre would dominate or Southern Luzerne County wouldn't have any representation. I think we're in a situation right now where you actually see a great deal of variety in terms of the geographic representation. But I can also imagine for a member of council who's trying to make decisions with 10 other people, that can be really, really difficult. So that's one issue that I would look at. The third issue is something that I actually think is pretty popular among the public, but I didn't love per se, the issue of term limits. And I think I would at least look at that because to me, I know people don't like entrenched politicians, but there's a way to get rid of a politician who the county and voters think is doing a bad job. Vote him out of office. And I do worry that with term limits, we end up losing good people who are experienced and knowledgeable in their job. And I think I might have been the only person who felt that on the council at the time, or the commission at the time, to be honest with you. But that's something that, I would love to see change personally in the charter.
Do you have any recommendations just off of that idea of term limits? I mean, we have something on the district attorney at this moment, council controller, thoughts.
I'd get rid of it for all those positions. Again, voters don't think the DA, someone on county council is doing a good job, vote them out of office.
Do you have anything? Is the inverse true though too, that in municipal elections, we only see about 27% of voters come out, that's not a great chunk of people, that sometimes we need to have these restraints on our elected officials as well?
I mean, I think if you had a position, like if you look at the federal level, someone who's going to have incredible power over the government, like a president, I think it makes sense to do that. I think in the system that we have now, we have a fair number of checks and balances. We have separation of powers, which didn't exist under the commissioner form of government. So yes, you're right. With smaller turnout, you might end up having a DA who's there for, 4, 5, 6 terms. But I think if the DA is doing a good job, that's wonderful. I would also maybe just say one other thing, and I think your question is a great one in terms of, in hindsight, what would we do differently? The one thing I would say 100% I would not do differently is I really like electing council members at large. I think that going to districts would be a mistake for a variety of reasons. I think if you look at what the county does, children and youth, judicial services, we can go, recording deeds. There is no Hazelton way to do this. There's no Wilkes-Barre way to do this. These are county functions. And I think if, we divide the county, we're already an incredibly parochial area to begin with. And I think it gives, frankly, a mistaken belief in terms of what the county functions are. It's not like Congress where you're trying to bring back earmarks or bring back spending to your district. That's not what county government does. That's not what their functions are. They're county-wide functions. So I really think continuing it at large would be something that I'd be in support of.
Thank you. Size of council, you said you debated that a lot. Have you given any thoughts, recently of a number?
I loved 7. I thought that was a good balance where you'd have, a decent amount of citizen representation and you'd have a variety of people from around the county. But I think that's a more manageable number in terms of trying to have debate discussion, for the county.
I appreciate that. And then your fear of having solicitors for everybody, does that go back to the idea of, row offices? Everybody had their own bank account. Everybody had their own solicitor. Everybody was their own little fiefdom and not always for the betterment of Luzerne County.
I think it was inefficient. I think it was overly expensive. I think you had intra-county litigation, which was unnecessary. And, no offense to any lawyers, but I think we want our lawyers to have their ultimate loyalty to the county, not to a specific office or a specific part of the government. I think, frankly, that puts lawyers in an unhealthy position. And to me, it lessens the confidence that citizens are going to have in terms of the legal advice that people within the county get.
Any thoughts on an elected county manager versus appointed county manager?
Yeah, I was wrong. When we had the debate, my initial thought was that I thought we should have elected county manager. And given hindsight and given what I've seen, I think that the decision made by the study commission to have someone who was appointed based on merit, who does not have to worry about pleasing donors, for example, has served our county much, much better than a popularity contest where you're making a decision perhaps based on winning re-election or who's donated money to you. So I think I was 100% wrong with that.
I don't think this room has heard somebody say that in a long time, at different times. So
my wife would love it if that was in the record that I said I was 100% wrong. By
Ms. Lawrence, we'll make sure we have that. Mr. Kersey, is there anything else in regards to, the restrictions of ABCs? I tend to agree with you. I think they're very restrictive. Mr. Ritzik has brought that up over and over again. And I think all of us here, at least myself, see why you did that, though.
Yeah.
You had to.
Yeah.
You had to handcuff people to do that because of what was going on at that point in time.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for the charter. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Other people who would like to question?
So I'd just like to ask you, kind of on the topic of the restrictions on council and the ABCs and all of that. We had a few people come and say, under the commissioner system, you had this system where the commissioner would hold an executive role in terms of implementing day-to-day operations in government to some extent, and a legislative role. And in drafting the charter, did that combination of powers maybe influence the charter drafters to say, well, we're going to have this council, and despite the fact that we've now separated executive and legislative, we're still going to necessarily treat the legislative branch as if they do have all the executive power, that the commissioner is used to. Was that maybe some of the inspiration behind that?
Are you talking specifically about with authorities, boards, and commissions, or
in general with the restrictions on, council members, not working as an employee for a year and going further than the State Ethics Act already does in restricting, former elected officials?
Well, I think if you look back at the time period, there was an incredible lack of confidence in county government. And I think that lack of confidence, frankly, was well earned at the time. There was a feeling that in order to be involved in county government, you needed to know the right people. It wasn't about your qualifications, and that to get appointed to, let's say, an authority board and commission, it was going to have more to do with who you knew or what contracts or contacts you had within the county. And when I was looking back at the charter, at the specific restrictions, elected county officials, county employees, and employees, or anyone who's employed or compensated by a business that has a contract with the county. Of those three, the one that I think is in some ways the most restrictive and maybe the least justifiable today is someone who's employed or compensated by a business that has a contract with the county. That seems to me to go pretty far in terms of keeping a lot of, well-meaning citizens from being in the county. And I think as you talked about the separation of powers, just one example that I think maybe makes me more comfortable with someone who does contracting work with the county is that now for large contracts, as you know, it gets negotiated by the county manager, but then it has to get approved by the council. So I think that there's much more checks and balances in terms of, are we hiring the right people for the county? And if we are, and those people want to go on to a commission for a legitimate reason, that council can make their judgment in terms of whether or not they deserve to or not.
Thank you.
Others? The one thing
I have.
as you know, that we made an amendment in regards to that ABC situation.
Okay.
Unfortunately, for the authorities it passed, and for the other parts of the ABCs, it did not. The electorate, for whatever reason, passed one and then the other.
Yeah.
So that allowed a little better situation, but only for the authorities, which I agree with your position. I think we've lost some good people, or we're not able to add some good people because of that. Mr. Urban, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm regarding term limits. Did the discussion come up though that maybe, like, let's say you have term limits right now on the district attorney. Well, 14 years ago, part of the problem stemmed from some of those offices in general, because it was actually the judiciary and even in the DA's office that did not bring the kids for cash scandal to light. It was actually, my father, who was a commissioner at the time, and the county controller at that time. They're the ones through an audit process were the ones that related to the public and then had the ball rolling, with federal investigators and whatnot. I think people in the DA's office had a responsibility at the time to bring it to light, and they did not.
Agreed.
So what goes to say that you don't get a district attorney in there and it stays entrenched for a long time, right? It works hand in hand with the judiciary. And then, not to say, could potentially cover up something again. And county council, because I sat on council, sometimes does not get a lot of information. We have to dig. There were times where I had to file a right to know to get information myself. And I think, it's wrong that any elected official that works for a county or who's elected by the citizens of the county has to file for a right to know to get information. So I think there's a small double-edged sword there.
No, I think you could go back to what I said. You're 100% right that there is a trade-off. You do have the possibility of entrenched power that is there. And perhaps whether it's because it's not known or because there aren't good challengers, that they end up being in a position past the point where they're being effective. That's the trade-off with making maybe a little less democratic with a small d there. But you're right, entrenched power can become a challenge, especially if there's not a lot of transparency.
Anyone else?
Mark was saying something.
Oh, Mark, you have a question for Mr.
Yeah,
Carson?
I did. Yeah, I definitely agree with Mr. Urban and the concern that Mr. Malakari brought up before about term limits, but I had a different question. I was just wondering, you said that there were some things that you thought we shouldn't touch, and you gave one example. Is there anything else in the charter that you think, like, not to inflate your ego after you deflated it before, that you guys actually absolutely crushed that shouldn't be touched. Is there anything that you think we might touch? Mr. Morelli, when he was here last week, was talking about how the different parts of the charter interact with each other. And so if you change this, it changes that. And you talked about that a little bit as well. Is there anything that you think we shouldn't touch at all? Or is there anything that if we do touch, we have to be careful of what that means with something else?
Yeah, I mean, I know that's a good question. There's been a lot in the news lately about the personnel code conflicting with the charter in terms of, anti-nepotism provisions. And, as I went back and looked at the specific wording that existed in the charter, I frankly thought the wording in the charter was pretty effective, and certainly expressed the view of the charter writers quite effectively in terms of where the line should be drawn in terms of who can be hired and who cannot be hired. And the merit hiring system that was set up under the charter is something that I 100% would not touch, because I do think to a large extent it depoliticizes a lot of the hiring, and hiring is much more based on merit today than it was before the charter was written.
Yeah, thank you. That's definitely a concern I have as well. Thank you for your answer.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Just a quick follow-up to that. I was with a good friend of mine this week, and he had actually instituted an anti-nepotism policy in his school district when he was the president of the board. And he said the reason they did it was because the best candidates did not apply because they thought everybody who was related to somebody at the school district would get the job. And I think was that kind of the same philosophy that the commission had, is we're not getting the best candidates because you kind of just have to know somebody.
It was. And it wasn't only that we weren't getting the best candidates. People were leaving our county because they didn't think they could get a job if they didn't have the right connections. So it was damaging in terms of not getting the best people for government. But I think, frankly, it was damaging in terms of causing people to have to leave an area that they didn't want to leave.
Mr. Kersey, thank you for your thoughts.
You're welcome.
And thank you for your time. And I'm sure if we have some questions, we'll forward them to you. Maybe you can offer some opinion or background on things.
No, anything I can do, please let me know. And again, thank you guys. I think it's a great time in our county, having some, time and hindsight to look at what's worked and what hasn't worked. And I'm excited to see what you guys produce. Anything I can do, I certainly will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're very fortunate this evening also to have Jerry Cross. And Mr. Cross was the Pennsylvania Economy League person who worked very closely with the Charter Study, the Government Study Commission, to produce the charter. Thank you for your time. Thanks for coming, and thanks for volunteering to be part of our meeting this evening.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. By way of introduction, I was the former executive director of the Economy League. I retired, but we were consultants. I was on the staff of the 2010 commission, and I don't know that I could add much more to Mr. Kersey's wisdom, because your memory is pretty good. It was it was an interesting time. I have some notes here for your information, to give you some background. I do work with a lot of government study commissions. This year, I've worked with the city of Lancaster, the borough of Wilkinsburg, city of Shamokin. So there's a kind of a common thread for the things that government study commissions should know, or at least have an idea. And bear with me if you already know this, but the history of home rule in Pennsylvania has been separated by periods, I'll call it. It's been in effect since 1972. The 68 Constitution required that there be an option for home rule for municipalities to form their own type of government. And I think in the 70s and 80s, you saw that it was really a good government push. It wasn't anything more than an effort to sort of modernize the standards of government. Many of the codes that we live under were first formed in the 1940s and refined in the 60s. But if y'all remember, there was a big movement to professionalize local government, and I think a lot of the charters back then reflect that. Now, there were only 5 counties back then. The 7 of the 7 that we have now, not counting Philly, 5 of those charters were written in the 70s. And if you look at those charters, they definitely reflect the spirit of the times, and they're not bad models, but they do reflect the ideas behind the initial home rule push. After the 80s, things died down. There wasn't very many home rules. There was no home rule county charters approved. There was several charters that were turned down, but none that were approved until Allegheny in 2000. And Allegheny was more a product of the state legislature and the county officials than it really was a function of the Government Study Commission. Luzerne was the one, the most recent one that passed in 2012. But you have to remember that failure was much more common. The failure to get a charter adopted, a failure to get amendments adopted. Lehigh County, Northampton County had a series of amendments that were defeated. In Luzerne, if you know about it, there was a 1974 Government Study Commission. That was in the wake of the flood. That was in the wake of all the changes in local government in the 1970s post-flood. There was also a movement there was a question on the ballot in 1989 to form a Government Study Commission. That revolved around taxation. There was local leaders that had paid a large amount of money in what was then called the personal property tax, which essentially was a millage tax on stock that you held from out of state. And there was some fairly wealthy people that revealed their net worth by how much they said they paid in taxes. That really spearheaded that. That went down. That was not approved by the voters. 2003, I also worked with that commission. That one did pass, but that passed more as an initiative of disgruntled taxpayers. There was a lot of taxpayer groups back in those times. Mr. Urban's father remembers them for sure. There was a lot of that going around. So some of those things they formed around a kernel of something that really wasn't local government issues, but more political issues, more issues that a referendum or initiative could have taken care of. So you have to be careful not to be sidetracked into particular issues. Lancaster County, I worked on that one in 2006. That was really politics. They were just mad at the county commissioners. It was a very Republican-dominated county. There was minority representation, obviously, but there was a lot of stresses in Lancaster County with development and all the transitions from farm to urban to suburban development. That was defeated, even though it tried to represent the Lancaster suburbanites. It still failed. Clinton County, which is Lock Haven, that failed in 2006. That was initiated because the county ran out of money. Their bookkeeping was so poor. It's like a 6th-class county. I forget what it is, but they had a part-time district attorney. They had a full-time murder case from State College that they had to prosecute, and they literally spent all their money on prosecuting a case. That failed because it was not about basic core principles. It was about transient things. It was about the failure for the bookkeeping system to realize they had problems. Their row offices were not so well organized. So the conclusion that I want to give to you for historical perspective is changing the form of a government, whether it's a charter or a third-class charter county code, as we were. That's difficult. And it takes a lot of thinking on your part. I think Mr. Morelli said it. Obviously, Mr. Kersey said it. There are a lot of moving parts here. And if you fixate on just particular issues that are flavor of the day and lose sight of the overall structure of the government and what the government is designed to deliver, you may your charter may look good to you on really solves a problem that we have, but the voters may see it differently. It'd be a situation with the baby in the bathwater. So beware of that. And obviously, your task under the law is to review the efficiency and effectiveness of the current charter. And that's providing services. Mr. Kersey said that providing the services are unusual. We always joke in our profession that, when you're born, you go to the county. When you're married, you go to the county. When you go to jail, you go to the county. When you get divorced, you go to the county. When you die, you go to the county. Otherwise, you call your local government for road repairs. You call your local government for snow repairs and my neighbor's high weeds and all that good stuff. So really, county government and how it's organized and operated is really in a charter very critical to make sure the parts are all working together. So to that end, and I kind of an honor to the 2010 Government Study Commission, I wanted to read to you, and forgive my reading, what they said was the goals of their charter, which is now your charter, which is the government we've worked under. And when you review that charter, reflect on these goals, how well they were met, how well they've been continue to be met, and whether they were a goal that you would have agreed with in the first place. So these are in the final report. I know you all have the final report, but that was what the charter was contained in, and that was the direction of the Government Study Commission back in 2010. The goals that they described were: one, separate, and these are verbatim, so it's not my paraphrasing. Separate political authority from control of day-to-day county operations and vest day-to-day control in a professional manager and staff. Two, create more opportunities for citizens to serve in county government, provide for greater representation throughout the county, limit the influence of big money political contributors, and prevent the establishment of an entrenched political class. These are your founding principles for the charter. Three, establish real and meaningful checks and balances in the operation of Luzerne County government, which did not then exist. Four, cure serious inefficiencies in county organization and operations, which result from the independence of row offices and the inability to require uniform policies, procedures, and standards on all offices. I'll depart from their quotation, but what they're saying there is row offices obviously no longer exist except for the controller and the DA. But the second part of that is a founding principle: the ability to require uniform policies, procedures, and standards on all offices. When it was row offices, that just didn't exist. Five is provide improved ways for the citizens to be involved in Luzerne County government. Six is to require a strong ethics code with a mechanism for the enforcement of ethics rules and policies. Six is to end the insidious practices of nepotism, cronyism, and favoritism, and required appointments and hirings based on public notice, merit, fitness, and qualifications. And last but not least, prevent the imposition of ruinous tax increases on Luzerne County property owners. Now, you already know that's your job, is to examine the current charter and attempt to gauge how effective that charter has been in meeting those stated goals and modifying and changing things that you think would bring you closer, the government of Luzerne County closer to, I think, those admirable foundation principles. So with that, I'll be happy to talk.
Questions for Mr. Cross?
Mr. Cross, thank you for being here. Appreciate what you've done in the past for this county and, being here doing, really good work. The 8 goals that you stated are, right there in that direction. Out of those 8 goals, are there any in particular that you think that the current charter in 2024 is failing on? Do you think there are any goals that the current charter is failing on? Do you think that, like, in terms of, citizen service to the county, in terms of checks and balances, inefficiencies within government, are there anything that you notice or have noticed that we could do better here in studying this charter?
I would agree that the limitations which were put on service, is particularly volunteer service on the authorities, boards, and commissions, although as the chairman said, one was kind of cured. But those limitations of helping citizens be involved in the actual day-to-day work of government, that I think was a product of the time. It failed in that it's been too restrictive. The arguments back then were that it was a revolving door. You needed to get a break, that the county government was insiders upon insiders upon insiders. And the argument for the strict control of that was, we need to break that cycle. I think it went too far. It was admirable, but it did go too far. And I think it actually goes against the one founding principle: create more opportunities for citizens to serve in county government. I sit on 2 regional authorities for multiple decades. I cannot serve in any volunteer capacity with the county because I helped do some work last year and the year before. So that precludes people that are versed in their field from actually helping. So that's one of the big failings, I believe.
No, and I think that's something that we have noticed and have touched on. I just want to pick your brain about the idea of checks and balances within government. Do you think they are working today? Do you think there's any branch, from council as the ledge or the county manager as the executive, that has become too powerful? Is it just an ebb and flow of time? Do you think there needs to be an examination of the county manager, county council relationship at all?
As an observer and as one who's been around the state, I don't think the description of the charter as having separate executive and legislative branches is accurate. It's not accurate. The governing body is the council. where I get frustrated watching operations of the county for the last 12 years is the emphasis of, well, the manager's over here and the council's over here, and the newspaper plays up the conflict between them. And of course, council loves to have conflict, and they have endless meetings, and we all talk about things. And it seems like there's no understanding that the council is really in charge, that you accept the budget, you adopt the budget, you nitpick the budget. The manager's your facilitator. The manager's only power comes from the charter and from the oversight of the legislative body, the governing body, which is a very important distinction. The manager serves at the pleasure of the council, although it's a higher bar because you have to have the supermajority. But at the end of the day, the governing body is 11 elected representatives that take, what is that, 6 votes to pass legislation versus 2 voters in the county commissioner form of government. So from the point of view, I think the manager's position, and I think you've seen this with the different personalities that you've had how many managers? We have 5 managers or so. I think the outside world idea of, if you're the manager, that equates to the mayor, or it equates to some kind of elected executive, and there's this inherent tension. It shouldn't be. I think the council has to recognize that it is a strong governing body. I think there's a little too much, and it's not because of the charter, and it's not because of the actions of the manager or the council themselves. I think there's a little too much emphasis being placed on the council as the end all be all, and the council accepting like we're in antagonistic mode with the manager. And I don't think that's correct. That's from my observation. I think but I think that gets cured over time. I think that's a function of the political nature of Luzerne County.
Yeah, that from your response, it just sounds political in nature, of antagonistic to rally a base or to rally a certain group of people over an issue.
Absolutely.
Or several issues. Just one more question, and this is one that, as a consultant, I hope that, you know, in your past life that you could help answer. And I appreciate your history lesson, and it sparked this question of understanding home rule, where it was and how we got to where we are today. Do you think that home rule gives study commissions like this, or charter drafters like what Mr. Kersey did, a lot of leeway in terms of it, instead of it being a 1-lane road with guardrails on it, it's more of a 5-lane superhighway that has guardrails on either side, a lot more leeway than what some people may interpret in terms of creating rules and regulations. For example, resign to run is something that's been brought up here for the district attorney. I know that's something that was put in the original charter draft, and understood why. And it's been questioned about legality in the state statute. Do you think that's my example, that home rule gives the study commission more leeway to allow the government to operate in different manners?
You have to understand the philosophy. The principle behind home rule is something called Dillon's Law. Dillon's Law is the principle that local governments exist at the permission of the states, and local governments can only do what they are allowed to do by state legislature. Home rule turns it on its head and says you have the ability to do anything that's not prohibited. So that makes the Government Study Commission very powerful. It makes the design of your government very powerful. There is a hangover, I think, where people think, well, home rule is sort of an overlay, and if we have to, let's go back to the third-class county code and see what they say. And that's not true. I mean, your charter is your governing document. The resign to run is interesting because I think you have a solicitor, so it doesn't matter what I think, but I could tell you the genesis of the resign to run, Mr. Kersey may remember, was we're going to be a district attorney, then we're going to be a judge, and the judgeship lasts forever. You don't get voted out as a judgeship. So there was an attempt there to say, look, if there's a district attorney's position, a elected position, let's not imbue that with the power of incumbency to move on to the judiciary. Let's make the Mr. Urban hit the nail on the head. Let's make the DA worry about the DA's job. And let's not worry about what I can do to advance my career. Because look at the succession of DAs to the judgeship. That was very much on the mind of the Government Study Commission back then. I'm losing my train of thought on the other things you mentioned, but
No, you answered my question completely, and I wasn't aware of that little piece of information. I really appreciate how you stated that, and it allows me to have a clear picture and understand the objective of home rule in Pennsylvania. So thank you for that. Listening to you has been, really enlightening.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's also, I think, too much emphasis on, well, we're violating state law. Home rule is an open territory. You'll have as many lawsuits in home rule versus what you're allowed. But I think the courts generally look more favorably on a home rule charter and its requirements, and they liberally interpret it a little bit more. That's just my experience in practicing. But your solicitor and the legal minds can overwrite that very quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. I
Mr. Urban?
appreciate that.
I think one of the more controversial areas that I've brought up in the past when I sat on council was pretty much the Board of Elections. I think is one of the hot button issues in this county regarding Title 53, 2962A5 really is
You mean in the home rule charter law, the limitations on government?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I try to stress this in the past, and I've written numerous emails to colleagues at the time, regarding 2962 A. When you have a charter, there are certain areas of law that you cannot enlarge or sort of diminish, right? Under that particular section.
Of uniform acts, right?
Correct. If
That's Dillon's law in practice.
right. So if there's a uniform law across the Commonwealth, a charter can enlarge or diminish those powers,
Right.
and especially with certain topical or subject matter areas that are defined here in 2962. And the more recent change, obviously, that stemmed from this county, in my opinion, was the procedure of filling vacancies in the office of district attorney, because we had that sort of conundrum with the resign to run. I know Senator Baker went out and assisted in changing the law in that section that says the procedure of filling the vacancies in the office of district attorney are going to be defined in state statute versus a home rule charter.
And that's what usually happens. Legislature acts in response to a political pressure from a conflict of home rule charter.
And-
That doesn't make the legislature right or the decision
Right.
of the charter wrong. It's an interpretation, and legislators stepped in.
Right. I know, a charter is supposed to be liberally construed in favor of the
Of the drafting,
municipality.
right.
Right. But there are certain subject matter areas that we cannot change, and that's what I think.
Well, it's uniform law,
Correct.
zoning and planning.
Criminal. Like criminal law,
Well,
elections.
collective bargaining, Act 511 still pertains to your Act 111 rather. 511 is a taxing code, which you only have real estate under the real estate law.
Correct.
The election board's interesting because I should have said that in answer to Mr. Malakari. If you had told me, and I don't know if CJ agrees with this, but if you had told me 12 years ago that the election board was going to be a source of controversy, I'd be scratching my head and saying, no, because the election board, when it was under the purview of the county commissioners by the election code, you had elected people serving off when they were not running. You had them serving as the board of elections, and you had essentially the budget power of the county commissioners sitting on the election board. So there was no dichotomy there. I mean, I'm a county commissioner. I'm on the election board. If I got two people to vote for this, we're going to do it. They just move from the election board to the county commissioners meeting and they do it. By bifurcating the manager's job and the council's responsibility, as I said, one's budget, one's management of the budget. Council has supreme power on the budget. Manager has to have ability to manage the budget. I don't see the election board controversy, except for the political stuff, the political ramifications that the voting change of 2019 sort of engendered and all that. And the election board, and Ms. Williams there, so I have to be careful what I say because I don't want to, I'm talking as an observer here. To me, the election board controversy is less a failure of the charter because the section you cite about how you comply with uniform laws and the section of the election code where it says the election board will be responsible for buying and voting booths and the machinery. I think because the municipality under the home rule charter could rearrange how they meet the obligations of the election code, I think you can have the system we have now. But I think where the failure of this system is the administrative code was not, because it wasn't anticipated 12 years ago. The administrative code isn't isn't detailed enough or specific enough in the management of money by the election board, because those are volunteers, they're appointed people, and then you have the problem of appointed people spending county money without electoral supervision. So there's probably a middle ground there where the election board and the county government that spends the money could have a memorandum of understanding where there's certain requirements that the election board can do, but the county is required to fund them, just like the county is required to fund your commission, but you're independent, but they're required to fund you. They can't say no. So there's a certain give and take there, which I think it is maybe the smoothing out of the charter processes that got wrapped up in partisan politics.
Just one quick follow-up. I want to give you an example, though. I know
Sure.
within our administrative code here in Luzerne County today, it states that the division head of administrative services is the clerk to the board of the election board. Now, under state law and under the state powers that are granted to all boards across the Commonwealth, they as the board have the ability to choose their clerk to their board, right? Under law, under state law.
Mhm.
So that's, to me, that's one of those conflicts that council at the time put into place, not really probably reading or vetting that particular area.
Mhm.
And I think needs to be changed, because that's where council is now superseding the state law, because an administrative code is a county ordinance. That county order
Exactly. You hit on the key
it
point.
overreached or in my opinion, the powers that are dictated under state law.
Okay.
Now, state law, allows the home rule charter to be put in place. It allows you to define who those members are, as long as you have a minority member of a political party on a board of
Mhm.
elections.
Mhm.
Whether you're home rule or not, you need a minority
Right.
party representation. That's the only, I think, real stipulation under election code. But ours defines, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and then those 4
Right.
pick their chair. But no matter who we put there, they are afforded the full powers of Title 25, in my opinion.
For the conduct of elections
For-
and
for the conduct
and
of
the
elections and-
16 things that
Right.
the election code gives them
Right.
as their duties. Yes, I agree.
And that's where I think, some of the power struggle has been. And, having a council member on that board would, in my opinion, be a benefit, because like you said, it does segue into the budgetary matters. It allows them to see how much they need to spend to bring it back to council, so the council can vote on how much to spend. And then the manager then execute that spend. That's
Sure.
how I look at it. So there's some continuity.
There is, but there's also a department structure headed by the manager operating under a council budget. So the department head can function, I think, reasonably well in that liaison. But where I would think you hit on an very important point. The administrative code designated the clerk, right? The department head. The administrative code is your operating manual. It's not your charter. Your job is to worry about the charter. If you have a recommendation for the administrative code, that could be changed by county council tomorrow, or the length of time it takes to amend the ordinance. The administrative code is the flexible operating manual of the county that's flexible in response to problems that the charter didn't anticipate, that occurred over time since the charter was adopted, or just needs to be done to make government more efficient. That's the administrative code. So if there's a conflict of state law in the administrative code versus the election board's duties, it's not a charter issue. It's an administrative code issue. And that could be cleaned up in the administrative code. So that's kind of my take on that.
I think, Mr. Cross, you're correct. That was our doing a council. So that could be undone by council.
No, that's the administrative. The principle behind charter drafting, although Luzerne County's is very specific in many cases, the principle for charter drafting is keep it broad and require what's important under the administrative code. Put it in there. Must be in the administrative code. The administrative code will address. Keep the charter broad to give flexibility in government and give power to administrative code for elected officials to change things as they need.
One little comment. You talked about the back and forth between the manager and the council. And I really think that depends personally on the manager a lot, because that's the person who's running the day-to-day operation. But when you have a good relationship there, which I think is very present right now, you don't
Agreed,
see
agreed.
the disagreements and publicity that goes with it, et cetera. You know, we've had some good situations, and I think as you recognize, surely, we've had some that weren't so good.
That's the nature of management and councils, just like the nature of marriage. You could have a good partner and a bad partner. It's how you choose and the purposes you choose for it. So when I hear, should there be an elected manager? I think jeepers, the most popular guy in Luzerne County was a county commissioner elected in 2003. They would have been the county executive. And one of those guys went to jail. So imagine, you know, the elected position of county executive. Council would have no control over an elected, and you see that in Allen, you see that in Lehigh, Northampton counties,
Mhm.
very much so. You see it in Allegheny County, where the county executive says, I'm the third most important person in Pennsylvania because I'm the county executive of the second biggest county. You see it in Erie, okay? I think it engenders more fights and it infuses politics in the system more than the appointed manager who has to worry about their livelihood versus the judgment of elected officials that aren't making a living at it. But their judgment determines the nature of their job. So they have to perform, you know?
No, I agree personally. After serving for many years, that's a problem. And I think by, I try to keep up on those elected
Yeah.
positions. And you're right, there's always a conflict, always some kind of confrontation. And I don't think it's in the best interest of government. It really is not. Anyone else?
So,
I had a
Mr. Cross, thank
question.
you for, Mark,
Oh,
you want to
Mr.
go?
Herzog, you can go ahead.
Okay. So, Mr. Cross, thank you for coming today. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge of decades, in this field. So I know you touched on before, why some county home rule charters had failed to an extent. And it seems like, based on what you had said to us, it was because of, in some cases, kind of a lack of broad relevancy to what was occurring in those counties, in those municipalities. So in your experience in, you doing this for the extent that you have, what can this commission do to make sure that the product that we're producing, that, we're utilizing a lot of taxpayer resources to create, is one that has the relevancy that the residents of our county feel is worthy of passing, whatever product that we produce?
I think you put it correct when you said relevancy. The failed charters for counties centered around pet issues of people inside baseball, so to speak, and when it was given to the citizens were like, okay, what's the problem we're solving? And the famous anti-charter advertisement is, if you don't know, vote no. And unless the charter is responsive, like ours is, to a very bad time in our government, albeit the culmination of abuses of the third-class county code structure. 2003 didn't pass. 2003 had elected manager, had the districts, and it was more the plaything of activist groups, and there was less relevance to the voter. I think there's maybe more relevance now in that the county charter has a track record, and it's got a pretty good track record. I think reversing the fortunes of the county's budget. So it's got performance. You don't have high tax increases in the county level, albeit you have tax increases which are necessary, but you've got accurate assessments in property. That's been solved. You've got a functioning county government. You've got a responsive county government. So when you're looking to change those things, think about what works. Don't touch it. Remember, the form of government you have now is a form of government. If you're going to scrap that, you're going to have to develop a whole form of government that stands up against the current one. And you may not look so good in comparison if you don't do a really thorough job. Perhaps some of the ways you approach it is, what amendments do we do to the charter? And how do we integrate those amendments into the final referendum, if you have one? You can and your solicitor made a good point. I think at one of the meetings where he said it's a matter of degrees. How much do you want to change it? You know, how much do you want to change the form of government? How much do you want to simply change the operational inefficiencies? How much do you really want to get into changing the nature of council? How many are on council? The nature and relationship of the manager to council? Because once you start getting into those, now you're getting into the controversy, the relevancy factor. So as a government study commission, your job is to look at the effectiveness and efficiency of the current form of government, which happens to be the charter. And you always in the back of your head, Burwood Yost of Franklin and Marshall, an old friend of mine, we worked together on the Lancaster Charter in 2006 that failed. He wrote a little memo. If I can get a hold of it, I'll send it to you. His first or second point in the memo was it better be adoptable. You could have all these high flying ideas, but at the end of the day, it better be adoptable. And if it isn't, you wasted 18 months and thousands of dollars.
Mr. Schaefer?
Yeah, I just had a clarifying question on the Board of Elections issue. You talked a bit about the spending of money. Do you believe that it would be a good idea for us to put into the charter that the council has to fund the Board of Elections, that they have to have a budget every year?
The when you get into, and this is my opinion, when you get into putting into a charter specific budgetary requirements, you lock those things in for a long time. They only can be taken out by referendum. You know, as you did with the authorities, boards and commissions question. The fact is the charter provides for the administrative code to have a budget process. So there is a budget process in place for the Board of Elections. There's a dispute of who controls it and who spends it. Because clearly there's money every year. Every year you're putting aside money for salaries, for polling place rentals, for modernization of equipment. So it is in your budget. Okay, so it's no need to repeat it in the charter, because in the charter that's pretty strong stuff when you put something in a charter. Administrative code, again, though, could be a place where the budget process for the election board, or the zoning board for that matter, because it's covered by uniform law, that could be where you specify and break things out in the operating manual portion of it. The budget will include input from the election board, you know, something like that. Because right now, department heads must input to the county manager in what, September, August, September? I forget what the budget calendar
October
is.
15th is coming up. That's a date the budget has
Has to be
submitted
done.
to.
So the manager starts writing the budget in July and interviewing department heads in August. So, and the capital budget, I think, is before that even. So
Capital budget, you have to be approved.
but those kind of
In
things
some-
could be addressed in administrative code, which if you feel strongly, you write a charter, you integrate amendments to the charter, and you also in your report say the administrative code should be changed, and here's where it should be changed. You'd have less power to enforce that, but council would be silly to ignore the conclusions of an independent body that studied it.
Anyone else?
If you understand the interplay of administrative code and charter, you'll go a long way to making your life easier, thinking you have to cram everything in the kitchen sink into this charter and have all options and all possibilities covered by the charter, when in reality, you allow the county government to organically adapt to changing times under a charter via an administrative code. And the administrative code controlled by council, elected by citizens.
No, that absolutely makes sense. I hadn't even thought of the potential of putting in the administrative code. That's a very good idea. Thank you.
The charter's like the Bible, administrative code's like the church.
Yep.
Folks come and go, you know.
Are you going to be leading the church now?
No.
They need some help.
Yeah. I go
Anyone
to
else?
church.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Really.
Okay, well, thanks for having me.
Great.
I didn't
great
want to come.
time.
I told Ted, I really feel like I'm a conflict of interest here because my former employer is helping you, but thanks for having me.
Well, we appreciate your time, and certainly your experience and background is worth millions.
We were the local government arm of the Pennsylvania Economy League, which is a statewide organization. We had a really good operation in Wilkes-Barre. We were the local government experts.
Thank you. Okay. Down to agenda items going forward. I wrote myself a note, 5:30, we'll have an executive session, our next meeting date.
That would be the 7th. That would be the 7th of October.
Yes, I think that's correct, 7th of October. Mr. Ritzik, you'll be doing the minutes again. And Cindy, you'll be doing the treasurer's report, and hopefully we may have some things. And the budget will be submitted, so we'll hope,
I did email the budget to Mary Roselle.
good. She should know.
Yeah.
She's working
I
on.
have some questions, though. I have a question about that because I was at the county council meeting the other day, and there was mention of Mary Roselle and Attorney Skeen billing for their services, and I wasn't sure what that was about. I don't recall. I don't know.
Billing for the services where?
During the
There's-
meeting,
yeah,
right? They,
mhm.
it was mentioned that Mr. Skeen and Mr. Roselle there'd be a bill submitted in the invoice along with the sheriff's, the IT department. Is that referencing
I
the
think-
work they've done for us? in
Yeah,
the
I think
past?
what they're doing is keeping a log. I don't know if we'll get.
Oh, so they're not personally doing the
yeah,
work.
I
they're
don't
just
think we'll
keeping
get a
that
bill
log.
per se, but there'll definitely be an accounting
Right,
for all those different areas.
right.
Like,
But it just confused me
security,
when they
IT.
said it was them. I thought that meant that they personally had, no.
No,
Okay.
I was going to say, I know there was a few instances where we just had to ask them some things.
Right. I mean, I
related- yeah,
had two
and I
phone
think it was
calls and,
just-
you know.
Yeah, it was
oh,
just
okay.
stuff like that.
Yeah,
And that's
Okay.
part of county government really, because we're independent and obviously government is funding us,
right.
and that's the way hopefully we can work that out.
Okay.
Mr. Solicitor, you're going to have a report for next time? Or are you going to wait till after the executive session?
What would you like me to report on?
Well, do we have any thoughts?
So I definitely think it might be difficult because I'd rather have an executive session to do a little question and answer with you, Mr. Khan, about the analysis you've done on the DA's office. But if you maybe a brief oral report to prepare for the public on your analysis, maybe like a 30,000-foot view that you could do before we really release a bulk of the information.
Sure. I mean, if the purpose of the executive session is for the commission with privilege to find out how much of the privilege to waive, then I can't prepare that before the
fair.
executive session.
Right.
I'm happy to just reach out to, commission members individually, get everyone's pulse. We could figure out if it's necessary to even have an executive session, or I could just talk to you individually.
Well,
and-
we're going to have an executive session
Okay. So I don't know that.
because we need to
yeah.
be together and talk
Yeah.
about those things.
But regardless, if we're talking about just an oral report, as opposed to like a PowerPoint, that's yes, very easily. I can do that after the executive session.
Okay.
And I can at that time or now talk, there were some moments in Mr. Cross's presentation. If you want me to weigh in now on any of those, I'm happy to do that as opposed to next week, but it's up to the commission.
Okay.
Do you want me to speak to any of those points? Do
Excuse me?
you want me to speak to any of the points that Mr. Cross said your solicitor may have a view on? And I'm happy to do that now if you wish, or these are,
I think it would be better if you did it our next meeting, so you'll have a little time to put it all together the way.
well, I don't know that there's extensive analysis, but there's a few areas where if you want me to speak to them now, I
Do you
can.
mind if you just weighs in for just on a few of the points?
Sure.
Wait a minute. What points you're going to talk about?
Mr. Cross, he had mentioned a few times his view of the interplay between the charter and the administrative code and what counties that are home rule can and can't do. So
I think the charter and administrative code really is something that we should pursue as far as how that interaction works. So you have a thought on that?
yeah, my reaction to Mr. Cross's question is I think Mr. Cross put it really, really well. He at one point made a comment that at times there's been a lot of focus on whether or not the charter conflicts with state law, and that might be not the best way to frame the questions. Because as Mr. Cross said, you can always have people taking counties to court and there can be disputes raised, the legislature can always pull a trump card. And I think these analogies are very, very good. We can certainly talk, more in depth about the DA controller issue, but much more broadly, I certainly agree with Mr. Cross's recommendation that rather than looking at different pieces to see if they stand up to different tests that could be made. And, you have these areas that home rule charters can't touch. You have areas that no counties can touch. You also have a federal constitution that protects First Amendment rights. You have a state constitution that protects environmental and educational rights. These are all constrictions, but the ultimate question is, what does the commission think is working and is not working? And I think that the best advice I can give the commission on as the commission moves forward is to proposals that the commission thinks, well, we all agree there's something wrong with, elections or authorities, boards and commissions. And these are a couple of things we might want to try rather than the question, because Mr. Cross is exactly right. The county could always get sued by somebody who doesn't like some component of the charter. And sometimes a judge might surprise you and give you a ruling that you didn't expect. So I would concur with those thoughts to the questions that were raised.
Good. Well, hopefully we'll have a little more discussion on that, because that is a critical element, I believe, in the operation of county government. Consultant, Mr. Ritzik, will they be here the next time?
They'll be here next week.
And you'll
Or
ask them
next
to
month.
have whatever they're working on at this point. Have we had any?
I believe they've somewhat worked in consultation with Mr. Khan
Okay.
on the district attorney and controller.
So they can work together? Good.
Yeah.
Mr. Malakari informs me that Mr. Baldino will be here as to offer testimony or information. We normally have two speakers, and I think that has worked out pretty well. So who do we think we would like to have as the second person?
I would like to make a motion that we invite Ms. Williams.
I thought you said the 17th.
Well, at first she said both days she was
Yeah.
available, but she's here now, so she could. Is the 7th okay?
That's fine. And we have our two speakers. Right? Okay, what else do we want to add in that regard?
Do you think we'll be able to make a vote on Miss Lawrence officially serving?
I
as
have
our-
that down
Okay.
here as a motion to approve.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep.
I'm just, hopefully we'll get a communication that we'll use to make that approval. Yeah, I have the clerk, the minutes, the treasurer, solicitor, consultant, Mr. Baldino, and I'm Ms. Williams.
Do we possibly, and maybe this can wait until the 17th, but talking about a timeline in terms of when we're going to make our decision on, do we move forward and recommend some amendments or a new charter or no changes, or talk about like the next couple months maybe.
And I think the solicitor has to weigh in on those, how we do that, whether the amendments. Full document seems to be the story that we have to come up with. But I do agree, I don't think you have to do 90% over. I think it's more like maybe 5 or 10% over. And 90% seems to be working pretty well. Okay, I think that would be something that we should start the discussion at least. It's okay, document. Anything else? Okay, we're open for comments from the public. Please go to the microphone, name and residence, please. Is that on? I can't,
Ron Knapp from Nanticoke, Pennsylvania.
that sounds better.
First off, council clerk or commissioner clerk at this time, Lawrence, if she's doing overtime, I think she should, I was surprised to hear in the council meeting that she doesn't get time and a half. If she's doing more than 40 hours a week, she's worth every penny with all the responsibilities associated with. I'm really shocked. I mean, if I misunderstood it, please correct me.
I think
I'm
that- I
correct.
think based on what you're talking about, the council has provisions. We're looking at a different situation because we're independent and
No,
we have our
so
own.
what you're saying is you don't have the leverage to make that happen, right?
The council, when, she works with council, that's between them.
I got it. I
Working
understand.
here.
I'm
is-
just saying I was shocked to hear
We could
somebody.
set, we could set her pay what.
I
we
don't want to
said
go
she
over
was.
my 3 minutes, guys.
Excuse me, go ahead.
What was these? Oh, Mr. Solicitor Khan. Because some people want to be here and eye-to-eye contact, personalism is very big to me. Some of the first council meetings I started with in council was being present. So personable eye-to-eye contact. The thing I'm going at here is you talked about PowerPoints for presentation at the meeting 5:30 to 6. But then the PowerPoint would then be presented for transparency purposes for the public eventually, correct?
Yeah.
I think the question is what the board, what the commission wants.
Oh, yeah, to present. I understand. The whole point is, sir, if you can, you have a laptop, obviously, right? I'm asking this because we have a big screen TV back here for you to present that. But there's also this slide down. I have problems with my neck to be present in these meetings. And if you can have the technological advance to connect to this, to have that, so I don't have to be turning around to look at the slides. Do you understand what I'm saying, sir?
So I think what I understood the commission wants me to do is to give an oral report.
Yes.
So I don't think there will be.
But we can work that out. If there's an issue with your neck or physical issue, we can work something out so you're able to say anything.
Yeah, even if you had the sheets that you're going to present to
Or
the
even
public.
if we move that out here a little further.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, I don't
So,
want to
but-
complicate
Yeah,
things,
we'll
but
definitely have that worked out. whatever you
I'd
need.
appreciate that. That's pretty much it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Go to the podium, please.
Hello.
You turned it off.
Hello. 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 I'm from Pelham, New Hampshire. I was just wondering, if I could get a photo from my AP Gov teacher. He's a really nice guy. So right there.
What's your name?
Jude Coria.
Absolutely. From AP Gov teacher to AP Gov teacher.
You're going to take his photo too. That might help you more in the class. Okay. Anyone else? Go ahead. Who wants to speak? Mr. Griffith?
Yes. Yes, thank
Go
you.
ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things regarding the budget process, if I could. I would hope that this government study commission would approve whatever salaries they're going to pay. To Mr. Knapp's point, we don't know how much the county is going to be charging the government study commission. So I think that's something that the government study commission should get information on to be sure that we are clear with the people who are providing the service, as well as how much the government study commission is going to pay those folks. If, to Mr. Knapp's point about time and a half for Miss Lawrence, she's obviously a salaried employee on the council, so not eligible for time and a half. But for the government study commission, I think it would be in the best interest of everybody to know exactly what kind of salary we're going to be paying people, or if we're going to be paying their hourly rate, we're going to be paying them a flat rate, whatever. So something to consider as we look through into the future for the next meeting possibly. And the other question that I have for the commission is, I was kind of surprised that one of the questions that we did not ask Mr. Cross is, and I know this question's come up, Mr. McGinley can remember many, many times that Mr. Rabo brought this question up about the charter not being reviewed by the DCED prior to being put on the ballot for the voters to vote on. So something to consider as we move forward. If we get to a place where we're going to draft a charter and get something on the ballot, is that something that we probably should consider, which we might have missed at the last charter drafting? And I think that's been a question that's come up many times by Mr. Raybo, myself, and a couple others, is that the DCED never actually reviewed our charter prior to us putting it on the ballot. And that's the contention. That's why we have some problems in our charter. So if we consider that as you move forward, that would be helpful. Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Ross is sitting back there and indicated he'd like to speak to that.
Perfect.
I will speak to that. Mr. Griffin and I are friends. We agree as much as we disagree.
That's unusual.
Mr. Raybo, I know Mr. Raybo a long time. I would ask your solicitor to give you firm guidance as to what section of the Home Rule and Optional Plans law, number one, requires DCED review. Also, I would request the solicitor contact the general counsel of DCED and get it in writing from them, their responsibilities to local government commissions. As far as I know, there is absolutely no requirement under the law, nor should there be, in my opinion, DCD review of a charter for conflicts or those kind of things. I've heard it for the last 6 or 7 years, and I'm talking as a private citizen now. It kind of gets my blood boiling a little bit. I think your solicitor, one of his tasks was to explain to you your requirements as you draft the charter. I'm confident that that is not a requirement, nor has it ever been a requirement. If I'm wrong, I'll be happy to take Mr. Griffith to lunch.
Okay. Mr. Khan,
Yeah.
I think you have.
Thanks, Jerry. I appreciate
Passed it.
that.
Yes, but you do have a task there, just so we've covered that base and gotten some kind of response. Any other public? Anybody else on the chart, the Zoom? No. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, indicate by saying aye.
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 In opposition, abstentions, doesn't look like it. Thank you.